So hello. So today's lecture is about level design. It is about how do you create engaging and immersive experiences through effective level design. That's what I'm going to talk to you about today. To introduce, to start, begin with a little about myself. I'm Anuj. I've been making games for past 4 years. I've been a designer and an artist for 6 years. I've made over 10 games, but I've published four. I'm an avid enthusiast of indie games. I strongly talk about it on my blog in Medium. And I'm also on Twitter where I share about these games, and you can join there to know more about games, right? And you can always drop by in this Discord server by gamedev.in where I hang out, and a lot of other game devs hang out in the community, right? So, what are we going to learn today? We are going to talk about level design, what it is, what do you understand about level design, what do we understand about level design, how do you plan for pre-production before you start implementing levels, and a few frameworks like the 4T level structure, which is a few frameworks that help you as a level designer to start at a more solid foundation. And we'll do a case study to explain and understand how the 4T level works. And finally, I'll leave you with some references where you can, for future curious minds or a curious mind who want to know more about level design, right? Okay, so what is level design, right? Levels are basically these playable, engaging chunks of game loops or game mechanics that is like the basic game idea, and how do you reiterate on it and keep it fresh and more engaging and make a bigger level out of it. Basically, the things that you would be working with in level design is basically creating layouts for games, challenges which will engage your players to play the game and make them or teach them new skills and on them. Objectives, why are the players there? What are they doing? Navigate them throughout the levels. Rewards that kind of incentivize the players and also give a sense of satisfaction on playing a chunk of a level. And NPC encounters, which is basically either enemies or friendly characters which you interact with throughout a level, right? So the different kind of levels that are to kind of tell you that how levels are different is I'll take a classic example of Doom Eternal, where the first clip you see is the tutorial section where it's safe, where you are not challenged and you can explore the mechanic well in a safe space. The second one is exploration part in the same game of Doom, where you don't have to shoot anything. You just kind of explore and kind of get a feel of the world that Doom has to offer, right? And the third one is a classic Doom Eternal Doom level where you are just shooting enemies in this level that is specifically designed for your movement while shooting and kind of on that basis, right? So why do we make levels? Why not just go with a game idea and just get on with it, right? A lot of casual games have it. So the basic idea is that levels kind of give a sense of progression to begin with, but it also challenges the player with certain skills that the player is continually upgrading while playing the game, and also an understanding of the core mechanics. So when you come up with a game idea and you actually prototype it, you might sometimes end up making it too difficult, but that is the vision of your idea, right? So how do you kind of have the player come to that point where they can play that game but also enjoy it the way you visioned it? And that's where level design comes in, right? You come up with a small core loop of the game and then you iterate it from a small concept to a full-fledged game. And that's where level design kind of really helps us as game designers, right? And a good level would ideally have a good sense of progression, a very satisfying loop of risk and reward, which will keep them engaged, and a space for exploration and experimentation, so that the player doesn't feel forced. It's not a movie, it's an interactive medium, right? You want to give some interactivity and give back feedback, and that's where you need space for exploration and experimentation. The second thing is the context for the level. So when you're a level designer, say a AAA studio, you would never be working on all the levels. You would be working on certain levels. And in the brief, you will get certain constraints, and that is where the context for the levels come. So when you're designing a level, you have to really understand the core mechanic of the game, what the game designer made, and also the objective of the overall game, so that your level kind of falls in a place in the overall vision, that it kind of feels more intuitive and a part of the game basically. And it really needs to fit the story, the narrative of the game, and it has to give that sense of immersion where you it is part of a continual like it doesn't break the continuity, right? That's the idea of a good level. And the designer, although there's a artist who models these levels, but you as a designer have to be aware of the environment, right? Is it a city, is it a cave? Because given the environment, you will have to make these objects believable in your level, right? A rock, you cannot climb a rock, yeah, but it's more believable to climb a building, right, in Assassin's Creed. So that kind of has to be there. These the example that I am showing currently is these two games. Basically, the first one is XCOM and the second one is Windows. Both are real-time strategy games where you click and it's a turn-based game where you select a character and you take action, right? But the idea is that in the first game, there are a lot of guns, there are cars, and there the things that blow up, right? So in that approach of level design is very different from Wilderness, where the combat is more melee, where the character will come up close to the enemy and hit him, or there is magic in the game where you can control certain objects, and so the level design kind of changes entirely based on that mechanic and that idea of the game, right? So depending on the genre, we kind of can see these three examples. What the first one is the puzzle game, which is two dots. The second one is Atomic Heart, which is a 3D first-person shooter. So, in just to take an example, in the second game, Atomic Heart, it's a first-person shooter thing. So the view is quite limited, right? Like you have a small scope of vision, and so something that comes from behind can be frustrating, can make it very hard for the player to play. But compared to Monster Hunter, right? Monster Hunter is a third-person fighting game. So the camera you can turn around very fast. So it's actually you will get a lot of enemies that suddenly come from behind, and you have to make sure that or like the surrounding is all clear, and that's how you play the game. So the level design kind of changes around the genre of the game and how the person interacts with it, right? So now that we understand levels, why they are made, now that you have a game idea, now we can come to planning, which is, I think, the most important part of level design and game design in general, right? There are three core principles in level design that you should be aware of, which is the first is player engagement. How do you use these challenges, rewards, achievements, and feedback and progression indicators to kind of immerse the player? And these elements are actually defined way before the levels are made. So it's very easy as a level designer in a AAA studio or in a studio to kind of do this, because you're already given these tools or elements to work with, right? Then there's player choice, right? The player has to feel a sense of agency, that their kind of decisions and actions matter in the game, and it changes the course of the game based on their action. And that is a very important thing to kind of consider. And player learning, basically, what do you teach them? At the end of the level, they should be better at the game. They should be more aware of the characters and the story around it as built for them, right? So the very good example of this is this game, which is called Detroit Becoming Human, where you play as these humanoids androids. And the whole game is nothing but just pressing some options, like, you know, you're prompted these three actions and you have to kind of take them. And once you take them, you end a story in a certain way. You can go back to this, the second picture, that is a screen of a flow chart, right? What was the flow of the decisions you take? And there will be a lot of flows that are not, you didn't take them and they are grayed out. So you will go back in the game and play them again to get to work. And this is a very good example of how these animations and choice making are engaging the player, but also showing the player that their choice matters in the game, and in the end, making like understand how the game works, right? The document, it's a dreaded thing. It's hard, but it's very important to level design. And basically, you have to, whatever document you make for level design, you have to add it to the GDD, which is the game design document. And although the document is contextual to the kind of game you're working on, the common elements would be the game mechanic, the objective, and the purpose. These are usually common in all of the level design documents that I've come across. And you use tools like maps, spreadsheets, sketches, and flowcharts to kind of communicate your ideas for the level. So a few examples of the different kinds of GDD or level design documents that are made. So for example, the first one is of Age of Empires, right? It's a strategy game, and you have the way you would describe a level is through numbers, right? Like there are different elements, different buildings, different characters that are throughout the game, and they have resources, they take cost, they take time, and that is what you will define in the level structure. As to compare to a platformer, this is a level from Celeste, which is basically you make a level and then you have these lines or these routes that you will define and tell and describe the purpose of why those routes are there like that. Like what are the failures? Why did you place each element as it is through line and overlays of a word. And the third picture is from Counter-Strike, the DDoS map, which is the most famous one, I guess. And the way this is actually something that architects would be more familiar with, because they have done city planning and like technical drawings of buildings. And this is how most 3D games are made, through an overmap and top-down view of a map. And you basically label them, and then you have a 3D prototype which is basic with basic building blocks. But this is how you communicate to the game designer and everybody on the team what you're thinking about the level. So now that we know how to make levels, how do we document them, now how do we make them fun and engaging, right? You have a level, but you play tested it, but it's not engaging enough, it's not fun enough. So how do you add that? So the first concept to make a game more engaging is to look at pacing of a game, right? It's basically the balance between difficulty over time. And the idea is that you have to keep it as, so this is a chart which shows the challenger over skill, right? Skills basically, you can say time, over time you increase your skill, right? So if you increase your skill, keep increasing your skill without any real challenge, you will end up being bored. But if you have a lot of challenge without even developing skills that like can be tested, then you become anxious or even frustrated with how hard the game is, right? So the ideal way to go about this is the one that is mentioned here, which is the flow channel, right? So the way you would go, so pacing is something that is also there in the movie industry, in the script writing industry. And this is a classic example of Star Wars and Evo, where the story arc is such that the first part of the story is extremely exciting, right? It has a lot of action and it captures you, right? And once it captures your attention, then you're invested in the thing. Like the first time you play a game, if it's not difficult, you get bored of it. And if it's a little difficult, you're like, okay, I think I can like do this, I can complete this level. Then they capture your attention, and then you can like again make the graph go up. Like then you have their attention and you can build up with that right amount of excitement and tension, and then give them some space to think about or look back on what they did. The other thing is feedback to players, which is very important, where you give some kind of visual cues or sound cues to players, and like without even prompting anything, you kind of direct or navigate them to what they want to do, or what you want them to do, right? And this is a good way to kind of validate players, saying like, there are some Easter egg places in games, and when they get rewarded for like going off track, that is kind of a achievement for the game designer, because they know that they validated a person want for exploration, and that is appreciated. Then that is how you show as a game designer. And these can include, you can put in like, focus points, and, you can change the background music when you go to different zones, or you can have like these visual cues in the pictures of Uncharted 4 and Horizon Zero Dawn, where you use these visual cues to kind of direct them to where they want to go, and use objects which were in the game before, and now you're kind of using that to guide them, right? And the last but not the least is the narrative. You need a very good narrative to kind of invest a player into a level, right? This is a best example I would say is Last of Us, where the first picture is about a action scene where they are stuck in a building, right? And you have these stairs, and you have these places to hide, and that's the level requirement. You have a combat level. But the second one is a level where you give a sense of catharsis, or a sense of relief to the player, where you're like anticipating action, you're anticipating, but then you end up in the big field where there are giraffes, and you're kind of, all the stress from that is gone, right? And you kind of end up thinking, oh, like you can look back how long you've been playing that game and how far you've come. Right. And the third one is basically the character kind of moving with her friend in throughout abandoned mall, and there are hardly like one or two zombies to kill. But the whole idea for that level is to build the character and develop the story. So that level is very different from the first level that we talked about, because of the kind of need for the level, right? And usually the script drives the level if you're part of a bigger team, and it will decide the mood and the difficulty of the level. So now that we know what makes a level fun, we know how to write it. So now there are a lot of frameworks you can look around, but this one framework that really stuck with me, and I personally use it a lot, is this Nintendo's mantra, right? This is a very common pattern that you will come across in different Nintendo games, like Super Mario, Legend of Zelda, where they break the game down into 4 parts. And this is this person named Koichi Hayashida. He was a Nintendo pioneer who really took this structure and put it into the process. And although this is not the only way you can make a level, but this is a very solid foundation for beginners, right? You can just map it out and you can really think about the other stuff, right? So what does the T stand for? Basically, the 4 parts that a level can be broken down is to teach, train, test, and twist, right? So the way the level works is basically you teach through tutorial, easy, navigation, no challenges whatsoever. Then you train. You taught the player how to use the mechanic. Now you test it, like you give them a little easy obstacles and easy enemies, so they don't feel challenged that much, but they still are understanding the mechanic. Once they have done that, then you can test them. You can add in difficult hazard, more enemies, so that they actually die, or they face some difficulty crossing that level. And finally you twist. So whatever mechanic you were using in whatever way, that is turned on its head, right? You either add a new mechanic, or whatever mechanic is, you make them use in a very different way. And if you use this framework, you can then focus on content and balancing the difficulty, right? Now that you have a framework. So that's why I personally use this framework, because it gives me a lot of time to actually think about the context of the game. Right now, let's do the 4P on a game that is not Nintendo, because I wanted to show how other games also adapt to this. In some way, you can find that pattern, right? So this game is called Ori and the Will of the Wisp, and it's a 2D platformer. So the way, so there's an interview with Chris McEntee where he talks about how they experimented and analyzed and reiterated on these designs to kind of come up with this one idea of a mechanic in the game. So the game is really big, and this is one small part of it. But this is basically Ori's digging ability, right? He or she, they can dig through sand, and it kind of has this different kind of ways that impact the game. So the first one is basically how you can dig and attack a player and come out of the ground and it attacks automatically, which Ori doesn't. Ori basically has a sword kind of in which he uses to attack. But here, using the sand, you can just go through and come out and hit the player, right? So this is where they teach, just like nothing, no challenges. And then you come to train, right? How do you use the sand and you can maneuver outside the sand, right? Like you can do a lot of things with the sand, inside the sand, out the sand. You can have different play styles. So here the designer has given the player time and space to kind of learn how to use this mechanic, right? And then you come to test. So in test in this game, basically, once you understand how stand works, then they introduce these balls where you can, go through, which has stand, but it's not the whole stand. So when you kind of force your way inside the sand, you have the same effect as you had in the sand. So this is kind of now asking you to work on your reflexes and the mechanic that has been already ingrained into you. And it kind of tests your abilities of how good you know the mechanic. In the end, they twist the whole thing. Now that you are expected to understand all the facets, you are now tested for your adapting skills and the dexterity that is needed to play these games. And once in this level, they kind of combine all the mechanics that you've learned, and they add like more difficult bosses and without tanks and these balls. And it's a wholesome, holistic design where it is the most difficult part of the game, or for the sand part. And once you're done with this, the outcome is very satisfying, where you not only have a lot of reward, you have progress in the game, but you have also mastered this skill, this game mechanic. So it kind of feels satisfying in that way. And yeah, and so to kind of recap what we learned, basically level design, levels are important to scale up your small core mechanic to a full-fledged game. The context of what you're making is very important to the level, and you need to document that accordingly. The basic principles before you level design is player engagement, player choice, and player learning. And to make it fun and engaging, you consider the pacing of the level, you consider the narrative plot, and the feedback that it gives back to the player. And finally, a structure that helps in level design is the 4Ts, which is teach, train, test, and twist. And it can be a really solid foundation. For future thoughts, I have given some links for articles, videos, few books, which I highly recommend for if you want to get into level design. So start making your levels today. There are a lot of level editors which don't even need you to code. You just need to know how to use 3D models. And even if you don't, it's very easy to get into. There are hundreds of videos how to use them. There's some for 3D games and some 2D games of platforms. Thank you.